This is Elliott Dulaney. Are you Elliott Daingerfield Dulaney?
That's
what I thought. Elliott and his wife Julie live in Jacksonville, Florida. And they come, there's Julie, and they come every summer.
And my daughter,
Oh,
Ellen.
let's introduce the daughter. Ellen.
Ellen.
Ellen. The Dulaney's, the Daingerfield Dulaney's come every summer to Blowing Rock and spend as long as they can with us. This year they've even come back. Guess why? Because here we are. And so we're very glad to have Elliott here today to participate in this talk that you're getting ready to hear. In the center we have Joseph Daingerfield Dulaney. And Joe and Elliott, as you've already determined, are Elliott Daingerfield's grandsons, and they have wonderful memories of their grandfather that they're going to share with you. But first I'm going to share some stories about this one, who is my good and dear friend and on the board of trustees of BRAHM. He is the person that first wrote me in to this organization. Oh, it's nothing, come on, you don't have much to do. It'll be fun. So here I am, and glad of it every day. Joe and his wife, Raleigh, where are you, Raleigh?
She's
downstairs. She's heard this before.
Volunteering.
So Joe and Raleigh live in Charlotte and split their time between Charlotte and Blowing Rock, coming back and forth. And we've enjoyed their involvement in this museum, in the museum project, in the Daingerfield exhibition, in the catalog, in every phase of this project. Joe has been extraordinary. He's even my poster hanger when we have to go all over the counties. Joe takes them and goes, and what do you think? He talks to people along the way. So we're glad to have Joe here today as well. I wish the children and grandchildren were here too, but they've heard some of these tales.
I didn't see the movie.
That's right. And last, I want to introduce Rick Gruber. Rick and his wife Sharon, where are you, Sharon? There you are, live in Asheville. Having retired from the Ogden Museum in New Orleans. Retired? I don't think so. Anyway, they moved to Asheville, back to North Carolina from New Orleans, and had been involved years ago with Elliott Daingerfield, both at the Morris Museum in Augusta, Georgia, and in fact in Blowing Rock when the very first Daingerfield Days was staged. So when we called Rick several years ago and said, please help us with this project, he was sort of a reluctant bridegroom, but we dragged him to the altar, didn't we? Yeah, we did. And I think he's added immeasurably to the scholarship and the academic aspect of our project, in addition to his aesthetic good taste and his ability to hang paintings and teach us along the way. So Rick and Sharon have been big helps to us, and he is going to moderate this little panel discussion today. So, welcome, Rick, and we're going to share this microphone, okay? So we'll just pass it along. You want to start? I don't know what happened there. Now, this is not the Presbyterian Church. You can sit on the front row. Can you hear, Damon? Come up here.
No, I'm good.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne, and welcome to all of you. It's a great honor to be not only here, but to be a part of this day and this project, and to have seen so much happen. I remember Daingerfield Day about 15, 16 years ago, back in 1995, and there was a chatter about a dream that we had to build a little museum. Well, I thought a little museum was a little museum. This is not a little museum. This is a very grand project, and all the more important, I think, because you can look out that window and see Edgewood, Elliott Daingerfield's very first studio from 1890, and here we are in the backyard, in the shadow of what began as Elliott Daingerfield's world in the city with his grandsons. So today we're going to tell some stories. I'm going to try to offer a little history and sort of link things together as we move along, but I thought it was interesting that, and I just received this as we left, the new issue of Southern Cultures magazine, published by the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, is a very important Southern scholarly journal, but this issue is about memory, and about issues of memory in the South, and if that's not what today's program is, I don't know what it's going to be. It's an important topic, and of course, with the history of the Civil War, 150th anniversary this year, we got some stories about that and some show and tell. But I'd like to, I know some of you know a lot about Elliott Daingerfield, some of you don't know much at all about Elliott Daingerfield, and we hope by the time we finish this and you see the show and buy the book and read it, you'll know a lot more about Elliott Daingerfield, and can join us as we continue to explore what that all means. But I'd like to give you a very brief, about 2-minute overview of some dates just to give you a marker, because we're going to move back through this history in a little more depth. Beginning in 1859, Elliott Daingerfield was born in Harper's Ferry, Virginia. It was then Virginia, on March 26, 1859. And as we'll discuss, his first year was a pretty lively year because his father was captured by John Brown at Harper's Ferry, and some stories are related to that as well. In 1861, the family moved to Fayetteville. His father was transferred there to command the arsenal in Fayetteville. Lots of interesting stories around those Fayetteville years, and General Sherman comes in there too. 1870s, in the years after the war, in the era of Reconstruction, some very interesting times, and one of the big discoveries to me in this show we'll talk about is Elliott Daingerfield's early years as a teenager running a photography studio, and you'll see some of his photographs. We'll talk about that. And he was an important photographer early on in Fayetteville and in North Carolina as a teenager. Had quite a work ethic too. Moves to New York in 1880 with $84 in his pocket, and was also a frugal, very wise young man in New York, and ended up doing well quickly. By 1884, he lived in the Holbein Studios building. 1884, he married Roberta Strange French, who he knew from Wilmington and met in Fayetteville. In 1885, he met and befriended George Inness, one of the major painters of the time, and leading to Blowing Rock. In 1885-86, he was diagnosed with diphtheria and discovers and finds his way here. We'll talk about that, to Blowing Rock, where he spent 1886 to 1932. His summers were here for the rest of his life, literally. 1890, he built Edgewood. In 1891, Roberta died. In 1894, after several years of very, very difficult times, but hard work nevertheless, he met here in Blowing Rock, and we'll talk about Anna Granger from Louisville, Kentucky, was staying at the Watauga Hotel, and they married the next year. From 1895 to about 1915, he was teaching here, and Edgewood Cottage was a key base for that. We'll talk about Elliott and his painting ladies, a very important part of his story. By 1900, he built another studio called Wynwood, just on the other side of town. And in that period, Marjorie, his first daughter, was born in 1900. And in 1904, Gwendolyn, Joe and Elliott's mother, was born. So the story advances. In those years, 1900 to about 1915, he had incredible fame for an artist from the South, an artist in New York. A friend who's here from New Orleans just asked earlier, why don't I know more about this artist? Good question. And our job is to make sure you do. And I think what we'll be talking about, and you'll be seeing more of as this show advances and the programs advance and you read the catalog, is that Elliott Daingerfield was one of the most important artists of his time. Not just in Blowing Rock, in New York and nationally, literally from coast to coast. One of the most important and successful artists in America. He was known as American Ballet. We'll talk about that briefly. He was known for his religious paintings. You'll see a number of those downstairs. He was known for his landscapes, which are phenomenal landscapes, and for a broad range of other types of works. He was commissioned to paint some important murals. We'll talk about those. He went west in 1910 to the Grand Canyon and became known as the genius of the canyon for his paintings of the Grand Canyon. He went to California in 1913, painted on the coast. Why don't we know more about this? There's just so much to talk about with this man. In 1915, he bought land on the edge of the city, and in 1916-17 built Westclo, and I know most of you know Westclo here. Westclo is an important part of this story. We're going to talk about that. And 1917, they spent their first summer there. In 1918, he painted a mural that you can see in the church across the street, and that church was renamed with that mural's presentation by him. 1924, moving through this history quickly, he suffered an embolism after a trip to Europe with his family. And usually the story sort of ends there. He had quiet later years and painted a few things and not much happened. As you'll hear, that's not exactly true. A lot of things happened those late years, and some great trips to the South and some interesting paintings resulted. leading up to finally his death on October 22nd, 1932. He died in his New York studio in the Gainsborough Studio Building at the age of 73. Our key point here is that Blowing Rock is the center of this part of the story. Blowing Rock is key to Elliott Daingerfield from 1886 to 1932. He had 3 studios here, as a church mural across the street. So he has a very strong physical presence still today. This museum is a great tribute to not only his vision, but also to the whole spirit, history, and culture of this city and this region. And his legacy lives on literally, sitting up here with us today. I've got a few questions. I want to get started, but I'd like to read just one sentence. We've all worked long and hard on this project, and I was trying to find a way very concisely to describe Elliott Daingerfield in a sentence. That wasn't easy. But what I said, and Joe and Elliott signed off on this, so I guess I got away with it, was that visionary conservative, pioneer and traditionalist, spiritual and spiritualist, intellectual and intuitive, rational and emotional, all describe aspects of the complex personality and spirit of Elliott Daingerfield. So, with that in mind, I'd like to begin and kind of move us somewhat chronologically through time. And the nature of storytelling is that stories go where they will. So we're going to try to stick to our schedule, but we'll see what happens. Joe and Elliott have got a lot of good stories, and we may be here at supper time, but we'll do our best to do this in an hour. Again, let's go back to the beginning. 1859, born in Harper's Ferry. Joe or Elliott, tell us a little bit about those early years, and John Brown, how does he get in this picture?
1859, of course, was, well, before I start, let me say one thing. I want to acknowledge the work that Rick has done, and we very much appreciate his input, not just with the catalog that you'll see, but also with the curating of the exhibit and so many other things, and helping this fledgling museum that's doing everything for the first time as far as we're concerned. And he's been a wonderful guiding help in all aspects of that, and we appreciate that, as well as the efforts of Welborn and Joann and so many people that have come together to make this happen. It is truly a wonderful thing. Grandfather, when he was here, talked about establishing a permanent art museum, a permanent art school in Blowing Rock. And although he taught art, and the art's been taught here ever since, I think this is an important part of that long-time dream of his. As far as Harper's Ferry was concerned, the Daingerfield family was from Virginia, and John Elliott Parker Daingerfield, who was Elliott Daingerfield's father, was the paymaster at the arsenal in Harper's Ferry, and they made guns there, and the war came along, and he was taken, great-grandfather was taken prisoner by John Brown, and there's a lot of story there, but really without stopping too long there, when the war came, he was sent to Fayetteville, North Carolina, took a shipment of gold there and did that successfully, and then went on to stay there, and he was asked to stay and be in charge of the arsenal, which he did. And you can occasionally go into this, we'll find Fayetteville rifles, because a great many of the arms for the South were made in Richmond and then in Fayetteville, North Carolina. But he lived through those years. They were tough years, and they learned privation, and they learned to do with nothing, to make their own shoes, to make their own clothes, and that kind of thing, because you couldn't afford to buy them if they were available to buy in the first place. One of the stories there, you all had seen at the end of the war. Fayetteville, like I guess every city, was very concerned because they knew of Sherman's march, and grandfather talks in his autobiography about the people of Fayetteville and how they felt. You know, they knew that Sherman was coming and that there were always troops coming. And one day that
Excuse me,
people
hold your
got up
microphone
and
up.
Thank you.
Could you hold the
oh
microphone?
yeah, one day they had people come up in the front yard of the home and say that they were taking over, and this was going to be used by the Northern Army, and so great-grandmother and her children moved upstairs in the house, and they were there for several days, and then great-grandmother found that they intended to burn the house down. She wasn't happy about that, and she got her children by the hand and went to General Sherman's headquarters, and although she didn't get to see him, she saw another general that understood her plight, told her there was nothing he could do about it. They were going to burn the house, and but he was very nice in saying that he would send some troops around that evening with a wagon, or with several wagons, and he did. He sent several wagons and troops around, and they were able to take things they wanted out of the house. And I'm going to let him, Grandfather, tell you some of the story himself. In reading this to you from his autobiography. It's just about a paragraph. The only gun or firearm in the house was a long barrel fowling piece, flintlock, and mounted with silver. This is Grandfather talking about the only gun. This is well known to us as having belonged to General George Washington and was brought from Virginia, greatly treasured